I'm going to say something to you right now that might sound harsh, but I need you to hear it because it is the most important thing I am going to say to you in this place. And if you take nothing else away today, I need you to take this. Most of you watching this right now are carrying something inside you that you have never put down. You have been carrying it for years, in some cases decades. You have learned to walk around it, to work around it, to sleep around it. You have organized your whole life so that you never have to look at it directly. And some of you have gotten so good at the organizing that there are days you almost forget it is there. Almost. But it is there. It has always been there. And the older you get, the heavier it gets. I am not talking about a regret for something you did to someone else. I am not talking about a conversation you owe another person. Those things matter, and we will speak about them. But that is not what I am naming today. What I am naming is the one thing that has no witness, no audience, no other person in the room. And most people go to their end without ever having done it. I have sat with enough dying people to know this. The ones still carrying it at the end, who had never done the one thing, were not afraid of dying. They were afraid of all the years they had spent not doing it. They kept saying it the same way. I thought I had more time. I thought there was still time. You are running out of time, and the time you have left is gold. I am going to name the one thing. But first I need you to understand why most people wait until it is almost too late. Because if you understand the why, there is a chance you will not wait. If something in what I am saying is already landing on you, if some part of you already knows what I am about to name, say something in the comments before this is over. You do not have to name the thing itself. Just say, I hear you. So the next person who finds this knows somebody was sitting here when you were. I see people who are very busy. I see people who stay so busy that their calendar is never empty and there is never a quiet evening with nothing on it. I see people who volunteer for every commitment, who call every grandchild twice a week, who have a project half started in the garage and another one in the yard. I see people who will talk to a stranger in a grocery line for 20 minutes rather than sit alone in a quiet house for 5. That is not ambition. That is not generosity. It is avoidance. Because when the house goes quiet and there is no task and no one waiting, then the thing is right there, exactly where it has always been. And the quiet is where you would have to face it, waiting for the health to come back, waiting for the grandchildren to be settled, waiting for the money to stop being what it is, waiting for some condition outside of themselves to change so that the inside work could finally be addressed. That is what I see. And those conditions will never arrange themselves on their own. Not for this. I see people who have confused the one thing with acts that require another person. An apology, a reconciliation, a conversation they owe someone. Those things matter. I am not saying they don't. But that is not what I am talking about. When you apologize, there has to be someone in the room to receive it. Even prayer has an address, a recipient. What I am talking about has none of those things. It has no audience. That is precisely why it is the hardest, and why most people spend their lives finding ways not to do it. It is not a personality trait. It is an inheritance. Fathers who could not sit still, who came from fathers who could not sit still, mothers who had no permission to be quiet, ever, who spent every hour in service to someone else. A whole line of people who were taught that motion was the same as living, and that stillness was something close to failure. That was handed to you. And you can look at an inheritance and say, this ends with me. A woman wrote to me some months back. She did not give her name. She said she had been so busy her entire adult life that she had never once sat in a quiet house without a task. She did not know what she was afraid of. Then her husband passed, and the house went quiet for the first time in 40 years. She found out inside of an hour. My grandmother woke before the sun every single morning of her life that I knew her. No mat, no candle, no book of words. She stepped outside, regardless of the weather, even in the coldest mornings when the air took your breath, and she breathed one breath, long and deep, and said 4 words, "Thank you for another one." I was 9, maybe 10, the first time I watched her. I asked, "What are you thanking the Creator for?" She said, "I am thanking him for the chance to try again, because I did not do it right yesterday, not the way I meant to. But today is another one, and I will try again." She was carrying things inside her she would never speak aloud. She had buried 2 of her children before they reached adulthood. She had watched things happen to her people that she carried in her body like stones. She had lived through hardship most people today cannot picture, and she carried it. Some of it she could not set down. But she knew this: she could not be grateful for the day still coming if she was drowning in the day already past. The gratitude was not natural. It was a practice every morning, including the mornings after she buried her children. She did not glow because life had been kind to her. She glowed because she had been kind to life. My grandmother told me, gratitude is not something you feel when life is good. It is something you practice when life is hard. Before I tell you what my grandfather passed to me on the last evening I ever spent with him, I need to say one thing. I am not going to be here forever. I have made my peace with that. But most of what I know was never written anywhere. It lived in my grandmother, in her mother before that, in my grandfather, in the ones before him, and now it lives in me. So I sat down and I wrote it. 20 teachings in 4 parts, in the order they were meant to be received. I called it The Native Way. The link is in the description. But stay right here. What I am about to tell you is the teaching people write to me about more than any other. The last evening I spent with my grandfather, the sky above the tree line was orange going into purple, and the air was full of sage and wood smoke. And he was tired in the way very old men get tired, not from the day, but from the weight of years. My grandfather used to leave the back door open a crack on the coldest nights, just a finger's width, so he could hear the river from inside. He never said why. That evening he did not leave it open. He sat facing me in the near dark, and after a long silence he said, "Be water, do not be the rock." The rock sits in one place its whole life and calls that strength because nothing moves it. The water goes everywhere. The water feeds everything. The water shapes the land itself, given enough time. Then he said, "A river that stops to look back at the ground it crossed becomes a pond." He was not talking only about rivers. He was talking about what happens to a person who cannot keep moving, who turns all their living energy back toward the past until there is nothing left for the present or for what is still coming. A pond does not go anywhere. A pond does not feed anything. It just sits, getting heavier, getting darker, going more and more still. And after long enough, something in it starts to die. I have turned that teaching over for 40 years. Here is what I found inside it. The one thing you must do alone before you die, the thing that turns the pond back into a river, is this. You must sit down alone, with no audience, and find the part of yourself you have been carrying in silence. The verdict you pronounced on yourself and never commuted, and you must forgive it. Not because it was nothing, not because what happened did not matter, because carrying it all the way to the end is the one waste you cannot afford. I knew a man named Harold. He was 72 when his wife passed, and she had been, without his knowing it, the last thing standing between him and the quiet. Harold had spent his whole life being careful with his words, his opinions, his choices. He had an entire silent system for it, never saying the thing that might cost him someone's approval, never letting himself want anything too loudly. He had been managing himself so carefully and so long that he had forgotten there was a self underneath the management. When his wife died, he came home from the hospital and walked into a house full of her things and empty of her. He told me later, "I sat at the kitchen table and I did not move for 3 hours." The thing he had spent 50 years organizing his life to avoid came out of the corner where he had put it and stood in front of him. What came up that evening was not only grief. It was older than grief. It was 50 years of careful, 50 years of not saying the true thing, not reaching for the life that was waiting, not being alive in the ways he had wanted to be alive, because he was afraid of being judged for the wanting. He sat there and he let it be seen. By himself, no one else in the room. He said to me afterward, "I was afraid of 1 hour. I spent decades organizing my whole life so I would never have to sit in that hour. When it finally came, it was hard, but it was fine. There was no monster in there, just an old man who had been afraid of the dark." After that, Harold learned to play the guitar. He had wanted to since he was 15, and had told himself for 57 years that it was too late. At 73, he took lessons from a young teacher and was terrible and did not care, not even slightly. He started painting, terrible paintings, and hung them proudly on the wall. He started telling the truth, kindly. He said to me, "The last years were the only years I was actually alive. Everything before was a rehearsal for a performance I never gave." Then there is Earl. Earl and Doris were married 51 years when the diagnosis came. They had talked their whole married life about going to see the ocean. Doris had never seen it. Every year, Earl said, next year, when the money is better, when the children are older. He said it for 47 years. The diagnosis left no next year. He packed a bag and drove 14 hours. And when he got there, he helped her out of the car and carried her down to the water's edge. She looked at the ocean for the first time in her life, and she wept. She looked at him and said, "Why did we wait so long?" She passed 4 months later. Earl drove home alone, 14 hours, and somewhere on that highway, he pulled over on the side of the road, and the weight of 51 years of next year came down on him all at once. He sat there in the dark with the trucks going past, and he did the one thing, alone. And there was no resolution at the end of it. I want you to hear that. There was no moment where it lifted. He got back on the road and carried it for the rest of his life. But he carried it moving. He did not let it turn his river into a pond. He kept going, kept planting the garden, kept showing up. He carried the weight as a passenger and not as a jailer. Not the weight making the decisions, just the weight riding along. Some weight you forgive and it gets lighter. Some weight you carry until the end, but you carry it differently. The goal is not to arrive without weight. The goal is to stop letting the weight be the one who chooses. I knew a woman named Beatrice, 71 years old. She had spent 8 years trying to repair a relationship with a daughter who had left and would not come back. 8 years of phone calls to voicemail, birthday cards that vanished, invitations ignored. She poured herself into the chasing until there was almost nothing of her left. I told her, love is a light you leave on, not a rope you pull people in with. You cannot love someone back to you. She argued. For a long time she argued. But one evening she sat down alone in the quiet of her house, and she stopped arguing, and she did the one thing. What she found was not what she expected. She'd been looking for an accounting of what the daughter had done wrong. She found instead something much older, a belief she had been carrying since she was young, that she was not enough as she was, that she needed to be wanted by the daughter to prove she was worth wanting. The chasing was not only love, it was proof-seeking. And when she understood that, something in her opened. She stopped chasing, joined a quilting group, started walking mornings, and about a year later her daughter called. Not because Beatrice had done anything different on the outside, because Beatrice had become someone different on the inside, someone who was not pulling. There is a word for what most people are carrying. I want to give it to you. It is not guilt. Guilt is what you feel when you know you did wrong and have not yet tried to make it right. Guilt has a direction. It points toward repair. What most people are carrying is heavier and older than guilt. It is the unfinished business of the self, the verdict you handed down on yourself, sometimes in a single moment you cannot forget and never commuted. And the only one who can lift it is you, in a quiet room, alone. There is something I want to say before we get to the close. I am an old man, 74 winters. I have made my peace with that, but I think about it more now, what I know, and where it goes when I am gone. Almost everything I know was never written anywhere. It lived in my grandmother, the way it had lived in her grandmother before that. It lived in my grandfather, in the ones who held it before him. And now it lives in me, and I am the last one in my family who holds it whole. So I sat down and I wrote it, 20 teachings in 4 parts, in the order they were meant to be received, the way I would speak them to you if we were sitting together. I called it The Native Way. A man named Walter, 77, lost his wife 3 winters ago, lives alone. He read it in 2 evenings. He wrote to say it was the first time anyone had explained to him why he had always felt things so deeply. He had spent his whole life thinking something was wrong with his wiring. He started keeping an evening fire again, the first one in years. A woman named Pearl, 81, carrying the loss of a son for 11 years. She wrote to say that after the teaching on grief and the fire, she went to a kitchen sink and said her son's name out loud 3 times. And then she made his favorite dinner for the first time since he passed. And Ada, 68, felt out of place her whole life. She said the teachings finally gave her the words for it. She did not belong in the wrong world. She belonged to an older one. She wrote it on a card and sent it to her sister. It is not a large or fancy thing. It is an old man's teachings written down before they are gone. It cost less than 1 dinner you will not remember eating. I made it that way on purpose. The price should never be the reason somebody went without it. The link is in the description. Now, before I let you go, my grandfather said a river that stops to look back at the ground it crossed becomes a pond. The one thing done alone, the quiet reckoning, the sitting in the still room with no plan except to finally look at what has been there the whole time. That is the moment the pond begins to move again. And I want you to understand what that moment looks like. It does not look like anything from the outside. There is no sound to it. It is just a person sitting still long enough to let the water start to move. I have lit a fire every evening for nearly 50 years, the way my grandmother lit hers. She used to say, fire is the oldest gift. When you sit near it, you are sitting near the beginning of everything. The first conversation happened by a fire. The first song was sung there. The first prayer offered there. The first time a person sat with their grief and said out loud or only in their chest, I am still here. That is what I want for you tonight. You who are sitting there right now, carrying the one thing you have never named to another person, the verdict you pronounced and never commuted. I see it there. I know it has been with you a long time, long enough that you have stopped noticing the weight, the way you stop noticing the sound of the river when you have lived near it your whole life. But the weight is there, and you can sit down with it, look at it, say, I see you, I know you are real, and I am done letting you make my decisions. Tonight, find the quietest room in your house, turn off the noise, sit down. You do not need a plan. You do not need to have forgiven it before you begin. You just need to stop moving long enough to let the thing be seen by you. That is all. The river does not need permission to run. If what you heard today stayed with you, the teachings are there. The Native Way, 20 teachings, 100 pages, written the way I would speak to you if we were sitting together. Now I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments, what is the one thing you are still carrying that you have not yet set down? You do not have to name it out loud. Just let me know you were here. I read every comment. And if this is the kind of conversation you have been looking for, subscribe to this channel. We are not collecting viewers here. We are collecting people who remember. Come back next week. I am not done teaching yet.